we, Angie and I started Poketo sort of as a side project in 2003. So we're on our 16th year now. And when we started Poketo, we had a lot of friends who were artists showing work. We'd go to all the shows, and the thing is, like, whenever we'd be at these shows, no one was buying the original art. And so as we're going through this, like, we had so many talented friends doing so many great things that we're thinking, okay, well, how do we make sort of artwork more accessible? And that's when we kind of came up with this idea of doing an artist wallet. And that was our very, very first product that Poketo did. And even at that time, it wasn't even a business, right? So my background is in film and video production.
And my background is in graphic design. I was actually going to art school at the time in San Francisco. Yeah.
And so when we met, we were thinking, and we had so many friends who were doing such creative work that we were thinking, okay, well, how do we get their work how do we get more exposure for the work? How do we get their work out there? And so that's when we decided to do a product, which was a wallet. It's like a very simple format, but we got our friends who were visual artists to actually design the cover of these wallets. And Angie at the time was, when she was in art school, we actually used all of the art school facilities.
Yeah, we would like print out all the artwork until like 4 in the morning on like using this really slow Epson inkjet printers, and we would cut them like by hand and with X-Acto, and it was just like a crazy, crazy long summer just printing out everyone's artwork.
But this show was really about kind of showcasing these artists and really bringing our friends and community together. So we were living up in San Francisco at the time, and we actually just rented a community space there to have a show just for the weekend. And prior to that, just kind of trying to get all these wallets in just sort of very limited editions, just to have something for the show, right? So we'd spend all day and night just kind of printing these things out and getting these wallets together. And when we actually did the show, it was just like one of those sort of magic moments in San Francisco. It was like, one, it was warm. It was like warm, balmy October.
Which never happens, really.
And all of our friends came out. We had the artists there were seven of them. We had all of their original artwork in the space, but we also had their products there. And what we found towards the end of the night, when everyone was streaming in, everyone was loving the show, the wallets at the end of the night sold out completely.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of that kind of like aha moment for us, thinking, oh my God, that was amazing. We got to not only have all of our friends together in this space and have such a great time, but this wallet that was meant to be art actually sold, and a lot of the original work, like in art shows past, were still they were beautiful, but they weren't selling, right? So it was really nice to see this product kind of just start to have so much. People were loving it. And we walked home that night and we were thinking, okay, how do we continue to do this, to do more of this? And that's when we decided, okay, well, let's invite more artists to be part of this project. And we invited 5 more artists for the next series.
Yeah, and it just went on and on like that. And then it's just, every time we would have a new collection, we'd have an art show, and then it was always the same thing. Like, none of the artwork sold, but then all the wallets sold. So we kind of felt like, oh my God, we're like onto something. And yeah.
Yeah, and it was just like, all of a sudden it was just like this idea.
And then we would get and then I hand-coded like the HTML website in 2003. So that was like HTML. Okay, we didn't have Shopify. We didn't have any of these platforms that you use nowadays. And really we didn't have Facebook. We didn't Google wasn't even around, was it? I'm not sure. Was it around? I don't know. It was around. I remember Googling something. Yes, it was around, but no Facebook, no MySpace, no, like the only social media platform that was around was Flickr. And we would like post on Flickr, hey, come to the show. And just like all word of mouth, really. And San Francisco is such a small city that you just tell one person and then they tell everyone else. So like they all showed up.
Yeah, and it was like just the slow build of like how do we, really the whole concept was art for every day. How do we really make art accessible and affordable in everyday life? And that wallet was sort of that Kickstarter of that.
Yeah.
And Angie and I never wanted to be pigeonholed into sort of one thing. We never wanted to be like a wallet, company. And so that's when we decided, okay, well, how do we take this idea of art every day and really start to expand that out?
Yeah.
And it was like slowly, sort of year by year, it'd be, okay, let's start to add apparel. And that's when we started to do graphic t-shirts. And
well, before that, we actually moved to LA and moved into Ted's parents' house. So this is like just going back to the title of the book, Creative Spaces, why spaces? People might say like, why spaces? Because we've always constantly had to struggle with spaces. Like, okay, where do we start our business? Where do we work out of? So at first it was like our studio apartment in San Francisco, like tiny little studio apartment. And then we moved into Ted's parents' house after, like when we decided to move to LA, we moved into his parents' house, like tiny little house in Long Beach. And we worked out of a tiny little room with 2 computers and a printer, and we shipped out all our orders from there. And then it just kind of like, once we started to do other products like t-shirts and other stuff and more wallets, we just like literally took over their entire house. We moved our workstation to the dining room, and then all the boxes are lined up against like their hallway. We took over their garage, and we even like took over one of the vans. Like we actually put the boxes in the van because there was no other place. So that's how the idea of creative spaces came about. And and then you can go back.
well, I mean, so it's, part of that is like all these different spaces that we've been, from 2003, sort of moving forward. But it's also, Poketo's always been, part of our DNA has always been about collaboration as well too, right? Yeah. So all of these people that we have been working with over those years, enlisting them on to Poketo to really kind of get their art out there, it's, those friendships and those collaborations have been sort of, the DNA of Poketo. Yeah. And so the book itself, is not only like what Angie's saying, it's about these sort of spaces and these creative spaces that we've been in, but it's also about the people. So, we highlight over 20 different creatives, everyone from designers and artists and entrepreneurs, musicians, and really people that have been sort of in Poketo's sort of world or orbit for the past 16 years. But
it's not even about their spaces per se. It just says spaces is like just an idea, like a focal point on like their entire journeys and their struggles as artists and designers and entrepreneurs, and just sort of like their journeys into becoming where they want to be. But it's like always work in progress. They're never satisfied with where they are currently, And
I think there's a lot of things to say as we were kind of meeting and interviewing all these people, we're seeing a lot of kind of the same sort of struggles that we were going through, starting our business, and even now, right? So, for Poketo, it's always been sort of a gradual process for us. We started with that one product and really trying to expand that idea of art every day, kind of slowly bringing in different categories. So from apparel and just things that we loved. Like if we saw that, we didn't have any beautiful dishware, we wanted to bring in housewares. And so that's what we started to make. Same with stationery, and really embracing this idea of art could really be sort of, the canvas of the world and really be part of our everyday life. Yeah. And And we were doing all of this really just through this very sort of step-by-step process. And from our home, at our parents, from our studio to our home at our parents, and then finally, we moved out of our parents' place. And when we did move out of there, they were just extremely thrilled, of course, right? They sort of got their home back. My dad actually did this little dance, and he was like, "Great, we got our home back," Always so supportive, but it was really, really sweet to kind of see them happy for us, but also happy to get their space.
Yeah, totally.
And we worked out of our home for a number of years.
We actually moved to LA and we bought a house, our first house in Echo Park. And when we bought the house, it wasn't like, oh my God, I love their kitchen or the bedroom. It was just like, they have, 2 big garages, perfect. We can put our inventory there. And then there's a master bedroom that's big enough for an office, perfect, we'll take it. The kitchen was horrible. All the bedrooms were super tiny, and it wasn't but it was our perfect house at the moment. In 2005, yeah. So we moved to Echo Park, and we started to just grow our business more. And
it wasn't until our friends would actually start to come over. What happened was a similar thing. The business was growing, and we were outgrowing the space, and our friends would come over, who were also who were artists, who were used to being in industrial spaces and having paint everywhere and things everywhere, and they looked at our place and were like,
yeah.
What are you guys doing?
Yeah.
How are you living like this? And we couldn't see it, because we were just deep in it. And we're like, what do you mean? This is normal.
We worked day and
boxes
night.
everywhere.
Day and night, just 2 of us. In 2005, we moved there, and then by 2007, it was already crazy, boxes everywhere. So we found another space, a loft, an immaculate brand new loft in downtown LA. We moved in there and we're like, perfect, this is gonna solve all our problems. But in few years later, that also became a huge monster mess. And we just moved from this place to that place, and then someone else had to actually come in and be like, how do you guys work out of here? By then we have 5 employees, and so we actually found a 4,000 square foot space in the arts district of downtown LA. And we really it was so big, it was 4 times larger than our current, the loft, that we decided to build a little storefront. We were it's on the street. No, at the time, Arts District was no man's land. There was no one walking down the street, and no one even heard of Arts District. Have you guys been to Arts District? It's really happening now. I mean, it was happening. But we moved in there, and we were kind of shit, what did we get ourselves into? How are we going to do this? But slowly and surely, people started coming, and we had a lot of events. We did workshops, and it was our shop was voted the best shop in LA by Wallpaper Guide and Monocle. Just really great magazines covered us, and it became sort of a center of all the art scene, independent art scene.
Well, I think the thing about it though is that with prior to opening that first store, we were online. We were also wholesaling our goods too, right? So we had hundreds of different retailers internationally that were carrying Poketo, and each of these times we would have different products and launches. We would always generally partner with one of our, a gallery or a store to do these launches. Just like our very first art show. The idea was just to really bring our friends and community together, to really have this launch of a product and get it out there. And so, when we opened that first store 9 years later, right? So we had been building our business and really building the brand for 9 years prior to actually opening up that first store. And that was sort of, for us, the Poketo space was now to be that home base where we can have all those events and have all those shows and really kind of anchor ourselves into a community. Whereas we were building that community and we were kind of, partnering with different venues, different locations. It's afforded us the ability to even travel all around the world. We've been invited to have shows in Barcelona and Tokyo and Glasgow, and each of these with the different artists in that local community to do that. And so in 2012, that very first show was like, wow, okay, great, Poketo can plant a flag. And even though we never had done retail, we basically just kind of
Just learned it by doing it.
just sort of learned by doing and just sort of went for it,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, so you might think, what, 9 years? That's a really long time until, I mean, you guys actually opened up a shop. And most people in LA know Poketo as the retailer. And not that many people know that we've existed for, 16 years now. It's because we were completely 100% independently funded. Like, we never borrowed any money from the bank or investors. Like, it was 100%. And we, as soon as we, when we would invest, like, and it all went investing into the business. And whatever we made money, and then we just invest more of that. Just so it was a very, very gradual sort of growth. And it, yeah.
So,
and all the people that we cover in this book are completely independently funded too. So you'll see that none of the homes are not like these. This is not like an interiors book. This is not a how to decorate your house kind of book. No. It's really about the creative's journey, all independent creatives' journey, and how they got to where they are, and looking at it from the side of their spaces, their studios, and their homes. This is not like El Decor in any sense. Do you want to show some slides?
yeah, well, and then also I think part of that, like, this book to us is it's this sort of 16-year history in a lot of ways, and that's why we're so excited about it, because through this whole thing, through running Poketo and really kind of growing the brand, and from being in that studio apartment, into our first store, and from that first store since 2012, we've opened now 3 other stores. So we have 4 stores, retail locations in LA. There's 2 downtown, 1 here in Culver City, which is not too far from Venice, and 1 inside the Line Hotel, which is in Koreatown. And really, it's been just this just like day one, as we're sort of gradually building the brand and building the business, the same thing. These stores have been sort of, we've gradually been expanding, and each of these spaces are also, very unique in the locations that they're in. Some of them, for example, like the ones at the Line Hotel and at the Row, we only have our creative workshops there. So that's where we'll invite different creatives, different artists to share their craft with the community. And those are spaces that, when you go in, you not only have this Poketo retail experience, but then you can also do these experiential workshops as well too. And this book, Creative Spaces, over 20 different creatives, like really 16 years of our friendships in this book, people that we've admired, from the beginning. Some are new friends that we've always loved their work, and has been this has given us an opportunity to really be able to get to know them and to go into their spaces. And you can't get more intimate than going into someone's home and going to someone's studio and really seeing, things unfinished, things finished, things in progress. And it was really, really what an honor it was to be able to do that and to go into each of these spaces. So we just have some images here. This is our latest shop in downtown LA. It's at the Row, and it's close to about a 3,000 square foot space, and it's a hybrid space, just like what we do like to do in a lot of our locations. So like this one and the one at the Line Hotel, we actually have the workshops there. We have art shows there. We have sort of our Poketo retail, where you can find everything from like housewares and apparel, like everything for your life. But it really becomes a space. We call the project space, because we always want to continue to have rotating shows and exhibitions, highlight different designers and artists. And this coming week, we actually will have our book launch party this Thursday at this space. And so really inviting the public to really just celebrate the creative community and the book. So this is that space here. We want to talk a little bit about, the process of the book as well too, because this we got really lucky. In our 16-year history, we've been honored to have people really love Poketo and what we stand for and our ethos of art every day, and just really embrace the brand. And the editor at Chronicle reached out to us and wanted to do a book. And what happened was, when we got on the phone, it just sort of clicked. We had very similar ideas of what we wanted this book to be. And we wanted it to be a celebration of people, of community. We wanted it to be beautiful. We wanted to show spaces, things that you normally wouldn't necessarily be invited into, right? Like to be invited into someone's home and to hear about their process and their work. We wanted to have this in the book. And so when we embarked on, when we got on the phone with the editor and we really synced with what this book can be, it really was a very, very quick process.
Yeah, I don't even know exactly who brought it up or how that idea came to be. At first they were like, well, why don't you talk about the founder's experience? But we were like, no, we don't really like to talk about our experience as much. But I think that from telling other people's stories, I think that we can also talk about ourselves as well. So, and we love spaces. I mean, Ted designed all 4 of the shops, and he loves spaces. And I thought, that maybe a good idea would be to talk about the spatial things, and then also people things. So that's how it came to be. But we went through so many different renditions. I mean, the cover design was the hardest, for sure, because we didn't know exactly. We went through so many different directions where we were like, okay, well, what about pink? What about a photo on top, on the cover? But that photo itself is so not indicative of what's in the book, because all the 23 different homes and studios that we cover are completely different from one to the other. That is just a loft. That is a loft inside a loft that they built for, actually, you can talk a little bit more.
I think one cool thing about it in the book, right, there's a Brooklyn apartment, a 1-bedroom Brooklyn apartment to a 20,000 square foot studio and home. So you have a range of different spaces in this book, and that's what's really cool. And through this process, Angie at Poketo does all the creative direction. She really is the one who is the look and feel of Poketo and the site. And I handle a lot of, putting out fires and being where I need to be, and a lot of partnerships and things like this. And so Angie's, looking at some of these covers was really now, once you've seen the final, but it was nice to see all the different sort of iterations that we went through, and kind of also how that just sort of relates to business and brand building and creativity in general. It's really just this constant iteration. And we see this in all of the different people and the spaces that we actually highlight in the book too. It's this constant sort of work in progress that Angie was talking about, this constant iteration and this constant growth, right? Yeah. So these are a couple of the different, two different
but there's like 30 more
covers that we that we were sort of starting to narrow down, right? And it was nice to be able to see these different directions. Here's another.
Yeah, well, it was all type, and I was really drawn to the left one, actually. That was my pick. But the booksellers, the Chronicle people, thought that against white background it may not pop so much. So we changed the colors, but there was another idea for all type. We definitely did not want a photo, but of course, some people thought that photo was better. It's more attention grabbing, but
yeah. And through all of last year, I traveled and I met all of these creatives. So many of them are from LA. We had many in Brooklyn and New York City. I traveled to Vancouver, and I think that there's probably some areas in between too that I'm blanking out on. But we got to basically go and go into each of these spaces. And I worked with a photographer, Yeren Mok, who's a photographer here in Los Angeles, who we've known for probably close to 10 years now. And we've worked with her in the past. And so we knew, she has a very sort of artistic and very unique sort of point of view. And we knew we wanted that look. We wanted it to be very natural. So the spaces and the people that we highlight in the book, we didn't bring any lighting in, no hair, no makeup. We wanted to capture the people and the spaces in those moments, right? In that snapshot in time. And we would literally, Yeren and I would roll in, and I would get right, to it and just start chatting with a lot of the feature contributors. And Yeren would go and she would just shoot, and she would find those moments and shoot. And
do you want to share some slides?
And so this is an example. This is Terry and Adam of the design studio Chowza, and they're in Bushwick in Brooklyn. And this was one of my favorite profiles. They're just, artists to the core. They want to create. They want to make. That's their thing, right? When they graduated and were starting their art careers, they had to figure out how to make it work, how they're going to live. And so in their Bushwick apartment, they actually built that wooden structure within the space. And it was just big enough, like when I went and visited, the space, the whole industrial space was beautiful. Probably like 20-foot ceilings, all concrete, all white, maybe a couple thousand square feet. So nothing too crazy. But they had this nice little wooden structure in there, and it was just big enough for a bed. And what they did was they actually Airbnb'd that wooden structure for income, right? So that allowed them to continue to experiment, to explore, to make their artwork without having to think about, paying the bills, all the overhead that would be involved, all the work that they would have had to sell, right? They made that, they were so resourceful, and they made that space something that would allow them to continue to make work. And I loved that, and I loved hearing that story, because it also reminded us of our own story, right? Of just like kind of step by step, how do we make this work? So this is Sonoko Sakai. She's here in Highland Park, and one thing we love about Sonoko is that, Angie, do you want to talk a little bit about how you met Sonoko?
I heard of Sonoko like 10 years ago when I tried to sign up for a soba workshop that she was doing at a local grocer, but it sold out completely. So I got in touch with her, and I said, hey, would you like to teach a soba workshop for Poketto? And she was like, yeah, totally. So that's how we got to know her. And she is a film producer turned now Japanese cooking teacher and food advocate. So she gets all of the soba materials from Japan. She gets all the buckwheat from Japan, and then teaches people how to make soba, ramen, all the pickles and all kinds of stuff out of her house. And that table that she's standing by, that's like the table where where everyone's cooking. She teaches outside as well as she teaches for Poketto as well as she teaches for other places, and mainly though she's actually teaching out of her house.
So I loved going to her home, because it was a small home in Highland Park, But every weekend she invites the public to come do these workshops. So her home then becomes this public space, in a community space, and she teaches these, this age-old craft of Japanese cuisine. And our co-author and I, Gregory Han, who's here in the audience, we went to her space and we got to see, what she does, and she actually made us like a beautiful bowl of like soba noodles that day.
Right there.
Like how amazing was that? So we, not only did we get to go into her home, we get to interview her and get to hear about her process, to see her space, but she also just then creates, from scratch, these soba noodles that we get to share, sort of family style, and it was a really very, very amazing and a special opportunity. This is Wendy Chen, and Wendy lives up in San Francisco.
Yeah.
She's a textile artist. She does a lot of very large-scale installations with rope.
But before then, she owned our favorite record store in San Francisco called the Curious Records, and it was the best curated record store that you can find. A small tiny one in the Mission. And then she sold that to her employees and started the whole iTunes program at Apple. And then she just quit that one day, and then she started experimenting with all kinds of materials that she was doing, woodworking, and then she found rope, and then that was calling her name. And then now is full-time artist using rope to create all kinds of structures and sculptures and paintings and all that kind of stuff.
But one thing I loved about her story was that all the different pivots that she did in sort of in her career, right? From being an entrepreneur and opening up the record store to then going corporate and really being one of the pioneers at iTunes, and then pivoting again into a full-time career as an artist. And she's still recreating and reinventing herself always. She also just came out with a book as well too, about her work. And I loved seeing those sort of 180s and how she's doing them. And I asked her one time, how does it all sort of make sense when you look back? And she's like, the one thing she says is, when she looks back, everything sort of connects. Each dot connects, right? So each thing led to another, and we don't know where that next dot is going to be. But I loved hearing that, because it feels very much. We relate to that.
Yeah, just the courage for her to quit her really cushy comfortable corporate job to now becoming full-time artist. That takes a lot of guts. And Sonoko, from being a film producer, now cooking teacher, that takes so much guts. All these people that we feature, well, when we first decided to write a book, and we had so many people in mind, but it's what are some of the qualities that they need to hit? So some of the qualities that was okay, needs to be interesting person. We like them. We like their person, and we like them as a person, and they have to have an interesting story. And so all these people that we covered actually met that criteria. And if they have a really interesting place, then that actually, of course, is a huge plus. But yeah.
But I also think, and we were intentional about wanting the group of artists that we have there to be in different disciplines as well too.
Yeah.
So, from the artist to a cook to a textile artist. This is Adie Goodrich and Sean Pecknold. Adie is a set designer. Sean is a film director, and together they have a studio. They're husband and wife as well too, and they have a studio called Sing Sing. And the one thing I really loved, and what I wanted to show here, each of the profiles in the book, they'll each have sort of a takeaway, what we call a sort of a takeaway. Most of the profiles do. So we asked Adie and Sean, what inspires them? What motivates them? How do they get their sort of creative juices flowing? And so it's a little hard to see, but that middle image is something that Sean drew. He was drawing it, he was sketching it out as we were having our conversation. And one thing I love is are some of the basically the mottos here. Don't sit for too long.
Sitting equals death.
Movement matters most. Be your art ancestors. Read for many hours after coffee. So it's just this idea of like, you're not constantly like in this zone of just creating and trying to churn things out, but like actually, zoning out with coffee and being out in nature. Those are things that sort of inspire their work and kind of keep them going. Another thing is that movement matters most. One thing, we had a workshop with Adi, and she actually, in that workshop, she actually had the entire group just dance to Fleetwood Mac, okay? So she had a Fleetwood Mac, and everyone was just dancing, just freeform dancing, just getting it all out. And by the end, everyone was just like energized. Everyone was like ready, to create and do more. And that was what was really cool. And that actually led me to now in my team at Poketo, often what I do is what I call a Monday movement. And like every Monday morning when we have our meeting, I have everyone just move and run and just kind of get like the endorphins going. And then everyone's like, whew, okay, ready. I'm ready for Monday, So I learned that from Adi and Sean. This is Lily and Hopi Stockman of Block Shop Textiles. And they do amazing work with a collective in India doing block printing, traditional block printing. One thing that I really admire about these two, they're sisters. And how we sort of, one thing that I really connect with them is that they're sort of this seamless unit. Even though they're two individuals doing two completely different things, Lily is more on the fine art side. She's a painter. Lily is the one to the on the left, and Hopi is got her MBA at Harvard, so she's sort of more business end. But they're both also creative, and what I love is that they're just, they kind of fill in each other's sentences. They look at it, they do this sort of exquisite corpse with each other where they're just like passing different ideas and patterns and things over to each other, finishing each other's work. And I really, being a husband and wife team ourselves, we really connected with them in that way and constantly just, being on the same page and kind of finishing each other's work, finishing each other's sentences, stuff like that. So I really, we always had a connection with them when we first met them. This is David Irvin, and he runs a creative studio. One thing I love, this space, it was a traditional sort of bungalow here in Los Angeles, big enough where he was able to create a second unit, so that's that unit there in the back, made of Corten steel. So something that basically is just going to age over time, oxidize over time, change in color over time. His interior mix of woods from like teak and plywood, ipe, like all this different wood. And what I loved it is that his just very sort of kind of spontaneous approach to creativity, his creative approach to design, not afraid of sort of mixing different materials, different ideas in, not afraid of things changing over time. So that's something that we saw in each of these creatives, is that it's never ending. Things are always continuing, a continuous work in progress. And you sort of see this sort of, his space kind of a metaphor for that. It's just always changing. And I really loved that about David's space. Mm-hmm. And then this is Takashi and I. He's an architect and, used to sort of multi-million-dollar projects for his clients. His home, a very modest, 1,500 square foot home in Mar Vista. Post-war, just single-story home, but really created a space where, he had that space for 8 years before he touched it because he didn't know what to do with it. And in this sort of iterative process, decided, okay, now I'm going to start to figure out room by room what I want to do. and you start to see that what he's built here for his family. I love that he is very much influenced in Japanese architecture. So that deck that comes off there, it's sort of a low deck. You can kind of hang your feet right off into this beautiful sort of rock garden. And he's really kind of creating his space not only for his family, but for people to sort of enjoy, right? One thing I remember him saying was like, I've spent years building these environments for my clients and building these inviting spaces, and now finally it was his turn to do that. But he didn't do it on a multi-million-dollar budget. He did it on a very modest budget, but with amazing results. And for a time too, when I asked him to be a part of the book, he actually was hesitant because it just wasn't, in his mind it wasn't there, right? And we start to see the same pattern with most of the creatives that we actually visited. They're like, don't shoot that because it's not finished yet, or I have plans for this and I'm going to do this. And it was really cool, like to see that everyone is still working through their creativity and through what they're doing. And the same here with Takashi. And then Lucas Pete, the one amazing takeaway that I got from him is that creativity is, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And that has always stuck with me. So when I, went in and visited him, he's a lighting designer in Vancouver. And when I visited him, his crew were, continuing to experiment, make stuff. And when we sat down and he talked about his process of it just being a long-term process, taking 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, just to kind of get ideas going. That is, and really, summarizing it as creativity is a marathon, it's a long-term game. That really resonated with me, and especially our experience with building Poketo in the past 16 years as well too. And that's it. I do want to open it up to Q&A and also just talk about a little bit about the process and any questions that you guys might have.
So after going through all those homes, is there any space, or was there any takeaway that you brought into your own home inspired by these people?
I think so, definitely. Each space that I went into, I always found, so from purely, let's say, an aesthetic, from an aesthetic standpoint, each of these spaces, so many different ideas, right? So when I saw David's space, who I showed you, with all the mix of woods, I loved that. I loved that he wasn't afraid to use, 7 different types of wood, concrete, different materials that all sort of like you would think wouldn't mix, but when you put them together and then the way he did it, it worked. And I loved just sort of not being afraid. Like I think that, in our own space, we're used to kind of like being very uniform about how we want things to look. But it was nice to see in that example, like, just go for it, experiment, like have some different things. And the thing is, spaces change, right? And even in our history of our stores, like each store, when we opened up our first store in 2012, and then our second in 2014, and then, so on, every 2 years we started to open up more stores. Each space actually was different. And it was actually, I would say, reflective of that time and our sort of where our interests were. I mean,
so you might think, oh my gosh, everyone always says you must have like the most amazing house with all kinds of stuff from your store. And actually, I have to tell you that it's completely empty. It's like all white. And everything is white, and we have very little things. I mean, Gregory could attest to that. Like, we have very, very few things. And we're so minimalist in our own lives because we're constantly bombarded by different images and colors and products all around our shops that I told Ted, like, when we were renovating our space, our house, I was like, I don't want to see any colors, no colors, because that's what I think about. I live and breathe Pantone books for a living. So when I go home, I just want visual space. Like I just want visual rest. So there's nothing on the wall, although we have collected a few pieces of artwork from Chowza and one of our other contributors, but I mean, it's very, very minimal. So.
But I think that's what was kind of cool about it. Even though like we started that space as a very kind of like sort of a palette cleanser, I like to say, you know, being downtown, being constantly bombarded with stimuli and color, having a home that was sort of a blank slate. But now, as you know, time is creeping, moving forward, we decide, okay, let's just add a little bit of this or a little bit of that. So we're slowly starting to introduce.
We only have three
artwork.
things on our walls now.
Yeah,
so.
but I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. It still allows us to breathe, but
Yeah.
it allows us to still have some work that we love, you know, that we love to collect, and mostly from friends for sure.
Yeah.
Hi. How did you guys come up with the name Poketo?
So we started out with wallets, right? And it was on one of those long road trips that we were doing, and we were thinking of what to call it, and we decided, wallet goes into a pocket. And my grandmother raised me, actually, so I'm really close to my grandmother, and she would always say Poketo instead of pocket. And it's our mispronunciation of pocket, so that's where it came from.
And we just loved the way it sounded, you know. I
Most
love.
people call it Poquito. We've heard Poktu, Poquito, but it's really Poquito.
And we loved that it was, you know, had, you know, family significance, but it also sort of sang on its own.
Yeah.
And Angie's grandmother, who's you know now I think 96 or 97, still alive. One of those. An incredible woman where, you know, she can see a flower, you know, coming up from the sidewalk and just be in awe.
Yeah.
You know, a fountain and just love it. And like she just has this lust for life. And she brought Angie up and she raised Angie, and we just loved that we could, you know, honor her in that way as well too.
Hi. So you guys talked a lot about the evolution of your process, and I had no idea that you had been around since 2003. And you alluded to the fact that it was a very different world and time in terms of no social media and just how people may be related to art. And I'm curious, in that mission that you set up originally, how has that evolved now that I feel like you do have, the last decade and a half, a much more emergent DIY culture of things like Etsy, and it's just like, it's almost the opposite extreme where it's a bombardment of everyone, you know, creating and sharing in a way that hadn't been possible previously. And do you feel like that has affected how you view Pocketo's mission at all, or yeah?
I think the mission has always stayed the same. So like, you know, it's art every day. So what we always wanted was not art as in, or as sort of like things on the wall that you can buy with a lot of money, but like everyday life could be filled with beautiful objects that you love. It's not like a lot of we're not like, okay, the more the better, but like fewer things that can really bring joy into your life. So whatever it is, like your favorite journal or favorite piece of clothing or housewares or whatever. So I think it's always stay the same. We don't tend to, I have to be honest, like I don't look at trends. I don't subscribe to any like fashion magazines or look at trends or what people are into, and I kind of like try not to look at anything because I want to be more, I want our stuff to be more original, and I want to, there is a sort of a Poketo aesthetic, but that's also ever-changing as well. It's very colorful, very like minimalist yet fun, but that also changes as I get older or as I have different interests and things like that. So
I think the curatorial is also key to this, and what I think also differentiates, let's say, Poketo from an Etsy or something like that. And I think from day one, it's always been our point of view. Even though it can be eclectic. I always feel like there was always that thread, right? Whether, for us, to me, like Poketo is about fun and it's about community. There's a lightness to it. There's a joy to it. There's pops of color, and you see that sort of in the aesthetic of Poketo. And I think that there's a difference there. Let's say,
Like curatorial and also accessibility. So if something that we bring in that I wouldn't buy because it's too expensive, it's probably not going to be something that I would carry, in the shops. So accessibility is very, very important. Of course, they need to be beautiful and beautifully crafted as well, and functional. Those are all like definite key points that we've never strayed from. It's always been the same.
Yeah, and I think it's also just been nice to to really have people visible behind the brand, and to be able to chat with everyone here. I think what an incredible honor, not only for us, but to really have a brand that has a face behind it, and not only us and our team and the artists and the people that are involved in Poketo. I think that is also a big difference as well too.
So how do you guys decide what goes into your store, or what's that process like? You kind of just covered that a little bit, and is there ever any tension between like the business and the art? Like, how does that taken into account?
No, not really. Now we have like two other buyers that buy third-party goods, and I focus only on making our own stuff. But no, there's not much tension. Yeah, I think everyone understands. Okay, well, it needs to be beautiful. It has to be. And it has to be accessible. So yes, it is hard to find beautiful and well-crafted things that are accessible as well. But and we also work with a lot of different artists to create our own products. So no, I don't.
I think to also just to expand on that, like if there's, I think you're asking about is there tension between what you want to bring in and maybe sort of the business end of stuff. I think first and foremost, like we always just want to be true to ourselves. Like, so we don't numbers don't come first, right? So it's first is like, okay, do we love this thing, or do we love the designer, or do we love the product? That's first and foremost, and that's what guides us, right? And I think the challenging thing, because when you go into our stores, a snapshot of it is, yes, there's many different categories, from home, office, apparel, like stationery, all kinds of stuff. But it's a mix of Poketo branded things and also other brands that we love and other designers that we love, right? And I think the challenge nowadays is also, because it's so competitive, is how do we continue to stay unique, right? And I think that we do that, we try to do that at least through a lot of the different products that we create. So we do a lot of product creation in-house. And that's the majority of our core focus on product is a lot of paper goods and things like that. But we kind of go into a lot of different categories. And then the other thing is, like, the people that we're bringing in, are they, sometimes many of them that's their first experience being in a shop. Sometimes it's their first experience being in an art show that we're hosting. So in a lot of ways, it's sort of a platform too for a lot of emerging brands and designers. So we love being able to do that as well too.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.